Hi there and welcome to Bike File with me, Wazza, the show that tells you all you need to know about the best bikes on the market. Now in this week's episode it's back to school time because we are looking at Learner Legal 125s. And coming up on this week's show, Louise is going to be out on the Sachs 125 Roadster while Rod will be sampling the delights of Honda's VT125 Shadow. And in the meantime I'm going to be out on Cagiva's Mito and Kymco's 125. Now if you're into cruisers you'll know that looks are everything while performance very much takes a back seat. And none of them out there are really exactly what you would call fast motorcycles. So whether it's 1000 cc's or in this case 125, what should it matter less as long as the bike looks right? And in the case of the Yamaha XV125 Dragster, I think we can say it looks pretty damn good. At least from a distance that is. Because you get closer and as you might be able to see from the scale here, this is a very small motorcycle. Very good for people who are short in the leg or learning to ride, but possibly a little bit ridiculous if you're over 6 foot like me. Because the 125 Dragster is so light, it doesn't need an enormous amount of braking power. But some manufacturers of cheaper 125s do sometimes seem to overlook this matter and still leave their bikes under-braked. Not the case in the case of this motorcycle here. There's all the braking power you could need with enough feel that still give you control, which is particularly useful for earlier beginning riders. Now when it comes to the handling, the bike's very light as well, very gentle, very easy to potter about on. Really, because it's so low as well and the bars are so wide, it's very, very manageable. The only time it may become a little cumbersome is filtering through traffic in town. Because that front end's quite raked out for the styling, it can get a little heavy flopping about at low speed through traffic. Other than that, very good job. So there you have it, the 125 Dragster, a bike that may be very small, but it's also really rather perfectly formed. For someone who's just getting into riding or wants that custom look and isn't too tall, wants something that's very manageable, this is a very good motorcycle indeed. There's not really any point to fault it on. The only thing I will criticise it for is the cost. You're looking at over £3 for a motorcycle that really isn't particularly practical or useful. But the choice is going to be yours. Let's see how it does in the scores now. Well, that's it for Yamaha's glitzy little XV125. Now it's time for something a little different because here's Louise with Sachs Roadster.
Now if I told you I know where there's a good looking brand new motorcycle straight out the showroom for less than £3, you might be interested. If I then told you it's got a V-twin engine, it's solidly built by hand in Germany, you might even be reaching for the phone. But if I then told you that at its heart it's a 125 engine producing just 13 brake horsepower, you might sit back on your sofa. That is, unless you're a novice looking for your first bike. The Sachs Roadster 125 is definitely a street bike. It's cheap to run, has fairly low insurance and a tank full of fuel will last you for days, if not weeks. When you fire up the Sachs, she makes a pleasant groan. But when you get her running, don't expect her to blow your socks off. The bike is geared more for a low top speed and greater acceleration, but this does restrict it to simply being an urban tool. But the great thing is about this bike is it's built by hand, by Sachs in Germany, using quality components and precision engineering. Love, care and attention have been paid to this machine, and when you look at it in great detail you can really see the quality of this bike. It's in showroom condition now and it should stay like this if it's probably looked after. You know, it's so refreshing to find something that isn't mass produced these days. When you do get it spinning you realise it's relatively lively for its weight, but it still lacks a lot of guts for a good overtaking manoeuvre. Around the corners it will glide with superb road handling ability on any occasion. This bike is like a scooter in a motorcycle body. It's a sheep in wolf's clothing and would probably appeal to the novice rider. Although when they have gained experience around the streets, they probably want to trade up. But you shouldn't really be losing much money on a bike like this. It is hand-built, so should hold its value. But how does it check out on the bike file scores on the doors? Let's look at the bike's performance. Now here, she earns herself 6 out of 10. That 4-stroke V-twin engine pushes out a measly 13 brake horsepower at 9,500 RPM. But a novice or a plodder will find it enough as they get to grips with UK roads and traffic. Now let's look at comfort. It has a comfortable, big bike feel with that upright classic riding position. The bike earns itself 8 out of 10 for comfort. As for build, the Sachs earns itself 9 out of 10. You certainly shouldn't find any rattles or rough edges on a Sachs machine. It's pieced together with care and precision. As for the bike's value for money, well, it's a tricky one. It's definitely a looker and you don't see many of them around. But at $2,999, it's not cheap for a 125 and a fair bit more than the competition. And for that, we'll give the bike 6 out of 10. As for street cred, the bike earns itself 7 out of 10. You certainly don't see many of them around, and the bike did turn a few heads riding through the streets of Manchester. In fact, one driver offered to swap his car for the bike. But do expect a few disappointed faces when you reveal the bike's engine size and performance figures. So that's it from the Roadster. It's time now to go back to Wasner with more Learn Illegal Bikes.
Well, we've already seen Yamaha's Cruisy XV and Sachs's rather funky Roadster, but if you want your 125 to be sporty, what about a Cagiva Mito? Just to prove that the 125 market is a complete mixed bag, we come to this, the Cagiva Mito, a bike that is the total antithesis of the Kymco Pulsar we'll be testing later in the show. Where the Kymco is all about being very cheap, very basic and very reliable at the expense of any style, the Cagiva is all about looking as cool as possible, costing as much as possible and potentially breaking down as often as possible. However chalk and cheese the Cagiva and Kymco may be, however, they do have one thing in common. Both are very bad motorcycles to spend your own money on. The trouble is, where the Kymco at least has the decency to look like a bad idea just standing still, the Mito looks like a brilliant idea to the unsuspecting buyer. I mean, come on, just look at it. What teenager in their right mind wouldn't sell their grand for a go on one of these? It is gorgeous. Then there's the genuine 100-mile-an-hour top speed in de-restricted form to be taken into account, the 7-speed gearbox to brag to your mates about, and once on board, I have to admit this bike does feel very good indeed. So if the Mito's so impressive, how on earth can it be a bad bike? Well, the biggest problem is that motor. Indeed, it may get to 100 miles an hour given a long enough straight and a following wind, but in order to achieve this feat, the motor's meagre power has had to be so diluted it's become almost non-existent. Rather than driving away from the line on acceleration, the Mito seems rather to run on momentum. If you need any other reason not to buy a Mito, then it's this. The little Cagiva is a bike that demands serious looking after and running on the finest 2-stroke oil money can buy. So buy a new one and you've a serious job on your hands to keep it sweet. And before you even think of saving cash and going second hand, remember most owners will have been skint teenagers with all the mechanical sympathy of your average grizzly bear, so the chances of a used example being in good nick are very unlikely. Beautiful this bike may be, but ultimately it's an overdressed, over-the-top nightmare that's about as fun to ride as a broken waltzer. Not recommended at all. Performance, 1 out of 10. Incredible handling, but nowhere near the power to ever use it. Styling, 10 out of 10. Coolest thing at the school gates ever. Comfort, 3 out of 10. Not really, not at all. Reliability, 1 out of 10. Most unlikely to go 12 months without mechanical mishap. Value for money, 0 out of 10. One of the worst bikes you could ever spend money on. So now we've seen Yamaha's XV and the Sachs Roadster, and of the two, I would have to take the Sachs because I just feel it would make me look a bit less of a pillock than the Yamaha may. Anyway, that's it for part 1, but please do join us again in part 2 when we're going to be back with Kymco's Lux and Rod will be out on the Honda Shadow. Hi there and welcome back to Bike File, where this week we're looking at 125s. So coming up in the rest of this show, Louise is going to have her buyer's guide to 125s and I'll be riding Kymco's Pulsar Luxe. But before that, it's time for Rod's road test.
Thanks, Wazza. Well, I have a confession to make. It's been quite some time since I last threw a leg across a Learner Legal 125, and even longer than that since I last rode one on the road. But if you're in the market for a Learner Legal bike and you have a liking for custom styling, this little Honda 125 Shadow may be exactly what you've been looking for. At first glance, this bike looks much bigger than a 125, picking up its styling cues from Honda's bigger V-twin Shadow range. But a 125 it is. Stick some L plates on it, and armed only with a CBT, you could be out cruising the highways of Britain on this smart little custom. Honda's reputation for quality means you shouldn't have to worry about reliability, and if you hanker after a big laid-back road burner, this could be your ideal introduction to the custom cruiser scene. The air-cooled V-twin engine is a perfect replica in miniature from Honda's bigger cruisers, and it looks big and chunky. The mudguards and tank dash unashamedly take their styling cues from classic cruiser styling, and if Harley Davidson were ever to make a Learner Legal 125, it would probably look quite like this. Not that they ever would, of course. I have to say though that this bike is very nicely built and very nicely proportioned, and quite pretty in a rather miniature kind of way. Personally, I feel that all Learner Legal 125s are underpowered, lacking the guts to accelerate inexperienced riders out of trouble. Riding a 125 that looks like a bigger bike may well invite car drivers to crowd you on the road. Not a pleasant experience for a new rider. However, if you are restricted by law to riding one of these, you may as well have one that looks pretty, that you can take a pride in owning, and wait for the day you can trade it for something bigger. If you dream of crossing Arizona by Harley, or just cruising down to the Bulldog Bash on an 1100 Virago, this could be the bike to get you off the starting blocks. It's well made, and if well maintained and cared for, it's still going to have a decent trading value when it's finally time to throw away those L plates. So, what are the scores on the doors? I'm tempted to score any 125 low in the performance stakes, but the Honda Shadow really is a little heavy and overstyled for its engine capacity. This bike is slow. Try to overtake even seemingly lumbering lorries and you can find yourself stuck out on the white line with the throttle against a stop, matching speeds with a juggernaut wheel bigger than you are. Ride 125? Think 125. 2 out of 10 for performance. For the smaller rider, the Shadow really does offer superb standards of comfort. Problem is, you have to be the right size, which I'm not. With my elbows jammed against my knees, I could probably bear this for 10 miles at the most without stopping to stretch. For comfort, I rate this at 2 out of 10. You may well score it higher. Street cred is a tough call. You may get away with impersonating a big bike, but the inevitable L plates will give you away every time. Perhaps the Shadow is trying too hard to be something it's not, unlike an honest down-to-earth learner like a CG125. It is a pretty little thing though, and I'm feeling generous, so I'm going to give it 5 out of 10 for street cred. Reliability should be no problem on a bike like this as long as it's maintained properly, which many learners aren't. Keep up to the service schedules and the little Shadow won't let you down. And you do get the full Honda warranty and aftercare. Must be worth 8 out of 10 for reliability. And that's it from me with the 125 Shadow. Here's Wazza.
Well, if any of the tiddlers we've tried out today have taken your fancy, here's Louise with the 125's buyer's guide.
Newcomers to biking have never had it so good. Today, the choice of learner legal machines is immense, plus with the new laws, provided your bike is restricted to 33 brake horsepower, then you're well away. So if you think you want to be a sports bike rider when you grow up, or an Hells Angel wannabe, then there's a learner legal out there to suit your taste and style. So are they fast?
Performance really is pretty much rev and go on the scooters, say 30 miles an hour unrestricted, possibly touching 55 restricted. If you know, 125 will do probably 115 mile an hour, so that performance on that is quite good. But unfortunately for the people who haven't passed the test, I've got to be restricted down to 33 brake.
Performance is usually is in general. Obviously, if you've got a geared machine, you probably get better acceleration from a geared machine than you would from, say, a rev and go machine, although the top end speeds would be comparatively the same.
Well, they aren't exactly going to set any land speed records, but with inexperienced riders on board, that can only be a good thing. If you learn to ride at low speeds, it helps build up confidence and it gives you time to react in situations that will arise on the roads in the future. As for styling, anything goes. The sexy little Cagiva Mito that really wants to be a Ducati and the Honda Shadow Cruiser both have tons of style. And there are loads out there to choose from. The world's your lobster. So what about living with a learner bike?
Learner legals tend to be popular with people that say just leaving school, want to get into biking. Like the first bike could say be a 50cc or a 125cc machine, or people that just want to get away from driving the car, say to work, for example, or for city parking fees. To get around that, they'll come in, they'll buy a bike, they've got the motorcycle entitlement on the licence, so they tend to go for a learner legal bike because they don't want anything fast, they don't like to prove anything, it's not a status symbol, it's just solely to get them from A to B, the cheapest possible way, and something they feel they can handle.
Extremely good, £15 a year road tax, subsidised or free insurance on a deal, you know, on a new bike. Quite often free clothing. If you can we can put a package together of clothing and insurance, so it brings the outright cost very much down for a new buyer.
Most of these little tykes are fine and dependable and will behave rather nicely. Do be a little wary of the Cagiva mind. The Italians have struck again, with reliability not being a strong point. As a learner and with your speed being reduced, you're not going to want to go very far on one of these bikes, so comfort isn't really an issue. There isn't a huge amount of storage space unless you buy a scoot, which will have enough room under the seat for you to keep your lid. Apart from that, they're as comfy as a bike can be, so are you tempted to buy one?
The trouble is, in the late 20s, if you buy a small CC bike at 125 and you pass your test, I think it can be a waste of money. I think the best thing to do at the age of 25 is to actually go to a proper riding school, be trained, pass your tests fully, then come back and then buy a bike of 500cc upwards.
And if you've always fancied joining us leather-clad lovelies, now is a good time to do so. The huge choice of machinery out there means you don't have to look like an elephant on a bicycle. There are loads of top-notch learner legals available that are fun to ride and will help you towards your goal of becoming a super cool biker dude magnet, just like me.
Kymco's Pulsar Luxe 125 may have been designed in Italy and built in one of Kymco's Far Eastern factories, churning out zillions of bikes every year, but despite the use of the word luxe in the name, I'm not convinced this motorcycle has anything to do with luxury at all. No, what it has to do with instead is being cheap, not very cheerful, and aimed at people dimly half-witted enough to believe that whatever motorcycle they buy, it has to be a new one. After all, the second-hand market is fraught with dangers for the unsuspecting buyer, who may well end up with a used piece of tat. But those worries are not quite enough to justify buying a new piece of tat like this. There are some of you out there, I'm sure, who think I'm being a little unfair on the poor old Kymco. After all, you can hardly expect miracles out of a bike that costs a sniff under £2 brand new. But I simply can't see the point in buying one. How can this bike possibly be better than a £1,000 second-hand Kawasaki KMX 125, Yamaha DT 125, and so on and so on and so on? It can't. No way. It may have the edge of newness over them, but they not only look 10 times better, ride 10 times better, and hold their value 10 times better, they'll also cost you less to buy in the first place, albeit being second-hand. The Pulsar gets its motor from Kymco's slightly inappropriately named Zing, a motorcycle that in actual fact packs all the zing of a night out in your local geriatric ward. However, it does have a few plus points, namely that when you open the throttle, it accelerates, and when you close the throttle, it slows down. The 125cc single lump in there actually feels quite a lot like Honda's CG125 once you get it on the move, and that's no surprise because that motor is the motor that Kymco used as the template for this one. So what you do get as a plus side is a very reliable motor that will quite happily run its way into the next millennium, we should expect. That single disc up at the front has all the stopping power you could want on a bike that won't break the national speed limit, although feel is certainly an alien concept. Then again, the forks wouldn't cope under any more stopping ability, so I guess we can call the whole package well balanced if we're being especially charitable. Handling doesn't really exist in any meaningful sense beyond the fact that the bike will go around corners when asked without doing anything too wayward. However, be warned that rough roads and potholes will probably have you out of that very hard seat, as the ultra cheap and barely damp suspension bounces you about like a 5-year-old on a trampoline. Running gear is basic at best, but you have got a pillion seat with grab rail should you ever manage to convince someone that getting onto your Pulsar with you is a good idea. Although do be warned, you may have to take to getting off and pushing up steep hills with the extra weight of an added body on board. Then finally there's a kickstart for the times that you flatten the battery with the electric one. Quite possible, as the electrics on this bike aren't the most powerful, and there's even a handy toolkit under the seat should you ever need it. If it sounds like I've run out of useful things to say about the Pulsar, then I'm afraid that's because I have. Now, if you happen to have had a charisma bypass and you've thrown all of your dignity out of the window, then do your worst and buy one of these. If, however, you do have a shred of self-respect left and a desire to enjoy your time on a 125, then may I implore you to have a look at the second-hand market. Not only will you enjoy yourself more, but you're going to save money too. Still, that's enough of my prattle because it's time for the scores. Styling, 0 out of 10. No, 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 no. Performance, 3 out of 10. None to speak of, but it does at least work. Comfort, 3 out of 10. Not really, not at all. Reliability, 1 out of 10. Most unlikely to go 12 months without mechanical mishap. Value for money, 0 out of 10. One of the worst bikes you could ever spend money on. Well, I'm afraid that's it for this episode of Bike File, so it's time for us to kiss goodbye to these lovely little 125s and the very beautiful Hollingworth Lake behind us. The fact that I'd rather leave the Kymco in the lake is a separate issue altogether. Anyway, do join us again next week when we're going to be back with a special show where we're putting together the best highlights that you lot wanted to see again. We'll see you there.